I'm really excited for the conversation today. I know it's a short and sweet conversation, but Keith, just from seeing the foundation space recently, which is one of the rewards for people who are most engaged, I'm curious to hear about your perspective on how digital and physical experiences of Calder can really combine to help us understand his work better, being a big fan of Calder.
Well, it was simple. I mean, I will say, um, I always have this weird fantasy of go into like a random building and go behind a random door and all of a sudden see sort of the world's most amazing treasure troves. And I felt like the foundation delivered on that. It was spectacular to say the least. And for anyone who, participated and ultimately achieves this reward, I will tell you, it takes a lot to leave me speechless. I was full on speechless on this. And, congrats, by the way, Audrey and Sandy. From what I saw, about 1,200 people completed the education. And I thought that first, hearing Sandy's perspective on everything, and I think, deferring over to him to discuss, but hearing Sandy's perspective on all the pieces was fascinating. Second, I would say understanding the pieces better, and then understanding why you took the approach that you did for the selection was unbelievable. But the thing that actually caught me the most off guard was watching the physicals vibrate and understanding sort of what Calder was looking to achieve in such a simplistic manner, but so powerfully. And so, I mean, I will say this, Will and I left, and for a good 2 hours following our departure of the space, we were nothing shy of speechless and complimentary.
Well, I think we should also be clear that your visit to the Calder Foundation was to connect you. You say the physical, to connect you to his work in a way that's the deepest form. But the reason we instigated this program with TR was with this idea that we could get people who were only exploring Calder's work on the internet or in published catalogs, books, and things like that. We thought that maybe this would be a sort of another way to get closer to Calder's work, since not everybody has the privilege to get up and close and near a Calder. I mean, in a museum, they're like artifacts. I mean, you don't get anywhere near a Calder work. You don't get to engage it. You don't get to vibrate with it. You don't get to see it move. You don't get to see it, engage the physical body in the way that Calder intended. So the whole NFT thing was an experiment about how do we get people to understand more about what he's trying to communicate, what he's trying to share, what's the experience that he intended you to have with his work, and then the actual art NFTs was a kind of exploration of what's the sensation that you're left with, or that you experience in real life. And of course, there can never be an NFT that properly describes that, or you feel it. At least not yet. Maybe a physical experience is coming in the near future, but in the current technology, it's just. I think Raul has done an amazing job of kind of an interpretation of the experience. Keith, what do you think about that?
I agree. I mean, I will say, as a fan, I had never experienced the vibration, right? And seeing that, I thought was transformative in terms of the connection. I do agree. Like, there's one relationship that you can have physically when it's in a museum. There's another relationship you could have digitally when you own a piece. I think sort of having all of it combined with the experiential is just transformative. I actually would love to go back to you though for a second, Sandy. Like, I thought when you stepped back and explained sort of the simplicity of some of the approaches that he took, like, and ultimately what it means, which was nothing, right? It was like the individual interpretation. I thought to me that that was some of the most powerful, moments of the day. Do you mind sort of taking everyone through that and just understanding sort of you know, the notion that, you could reduce sculptures to, very simplistic lines that you could push against the boundaries of what people considered art. And ultimately, art doesn't always have to have an interpretation. I thought that your perspectives on those topics just, really opened my eyes up. Do you mind talking about that for a minute?
Sure. Well, we don't have like a set, we don't have a place, we don't have a museum, and we don't have a set tour. We don't have a set, experience visiting the Calder Foundation. Every day, every time it's unique because works are moving through our office, going to exhibitions around the world. They come here, they come to be examined, condition reported, photographed, all those kind of technical things. But there they are for a few days or a few weeks or maybe a few months. So when you came, Keith, there were a series of his earliest famous work, his wire sculpting, which is he basically took industrial material, which is wire, and he bent it into volumetric forms. But they were actually representations of people, of the body, of animals, of action, of people doing things. They're recognizable like a bronze or a marble sculpture from antiquity is clearly representing a person doing something or a person's portrait. What he did was he got rid of the mass of the marble, the clay, the bronze, all of those historical thousands of year old materials. He just tossed them right out and said, I'm going to depict the same type of imagery, but I'm going to use it in a new medium, just some wire bent into little crimps with the pliers, making a form which makes a portrait, makes a face or an animal. And today we look at that and like every school kid is given some wire to bend and do something with in grammar school or an art class or so forth, and we don't realize that that actually began with an invention by Calder, that there was no such thing before he invented it in the 1920s. But the most radical part of it is that they move and vibrate, as Keith has said. Some of them are suspended, so they rotate, and we can imagine, right, how a three-dimensional but wire kind of drawing in space, how that could rotate. But what we can't really imagine is how it would vibrate. I'm talking about little tiny microcurrents of movement that gives the sensation of it being alive. And that became kind of the life subject for Calder, which is what is that energy that makes things alive? And how do we experience that aliveness? Like between two people, there's a space. And as you get physically closer, something happens with that energy in that space. We don't know how to quantify it. We don't know how to scientifically measure it and define it and give a definition or emotional definition. But nonetheless, as refined receivers and projectors, we can sense that energy. We feel the energy and it could be repulsion, it could be attraction, it could be any number of things that go on. Um, all kinds of curious things, and you can turn around away from someone, and as they come closer, you can feel them. Some people can, some people can't. The ones who are more finely attuned and the ones who are probably more interested in this discussion are the ones who have a sensation that something's going on. They have kind of heightened awareness. That is Calder's subject. And so when you see a mobile, an abstract sculpture of shapes and color that moves, on the internet, in a video on YouTube or something like that, you don't really understand what's happening. All you see is color and form in a kind of balletic movement. You don't understand that there's a resonating factor there. And that's the thing that you can only experience in person,
So,
like you did, Keith.
so Sandy, what I loved was, first off, everything you said, so true, right? And it's wild how something that you can enjoy and love and respect feels completely transformative when you see it take on a completely different emotion or, interaction with the vibrations. But I loved when you said to me that when Calder started this approach, everyone said, this is not art, right? And like literally put their feet in the ground. This is not art. And yet, like, this is the struggle that I think every great, original thinker, when they pose a new approach, finds themselves in. And, you know, we are in a moment in time with with the NFT space, specifically around collectibles in the art world, where people will say, this is not art too. Like, do you mind taking everyone through sort of like Calder's, ability to just push through? I mean, he's an artist's artist. So like an artist's artist pushes through and sort of leads for many others. How did he navigate the this is not art moment, if you don't mind?
That's a great question, and that's also one of the central tenets of why we became interested and were willing to experiment. And, we were willing to fail in making NFTs with TRLab. That was okay. We're the first big artist estate, first major artist estate that's doing this. You don't have, I don't want to name names, but you don't have any of those other famous artists like figuring out how to do this, mostly because they're afraid of being embarrassed or afraid of being told they're making things that are not art, et cetera, et cetera. Our community, the art world community, is definitely making a statement that NFTs are not art. I think that's kind of preposterous because NFTs are just a medium. And what you do with it is make art or not make art. And I agree that most of the NFTs that I've experienced are not very artistic from my history, from my point of view, from my love of art, from my love of human expression. They're beautiful images, or they're even not beautiful images, but they don't move me. There are some historical artists that have moved into Web3 and NFT community and are making digitally based art that moves me. But there are very few of those. But I could add that there are very few painters today that move me. So I don't think the percentages are probably very different. But back to your main question, Keith, is how did Calder and how do we experience things that are called not art? I mean, it goes back at the beginning of the 20th century. There's an artist named Marcel Duchamp who took a man's urinal, which you normally see in a men's bathroom, and he turned it on its side and he called it Fountain, and he said, "This is a beautiful sculpture." He signed it Armut and lots of other things, 1917. But the point is that he allowed you as the viewer to determine if it was art or not. He just basically posed the question, is this art? I say it's art. It's up to you to determine if it's art. And he also stated that all art is 50% the viewer and 50% the intention, idea, or physical object of the artistic maker, which is really a cool idea. And Calder very much resonated with that idea. Many, many of his works need the incorporation of your engagement for the art to exist. Otherwise, they're just, kind of artifacts, as I was saying earlier, artifacts in a museum behind glass you can't get to, which means if you can't get to them, you don't get to the art. You just see like a physical instrument. And if you go to the Metropolitan Museum in New York and you go to cultures that are 4,000 years old and you look at their artifacts, or let's say Egyptian artifacts, we don't know what a lot of those things are. We have people thinking about what they could be and hypothesizing what they could be, but there they are in a box in a controlled environment with maybe beautiful writing, but we don't know what the hieroglyphics. People still debate what the hieroglyphics mean. And there they are just as like these frozen assets from a prior civilization. And I don't want Calder's work to end up that way, as a physical object, metal encased in a glass box that you can't resonate with and harmonize with. So the idea that NFTs kind of suck because they're not art, of course, is just pretty ludicrous. And I think that the great museums of the world, it takes some time to get going, but the great museums of the world will start to collect NFTs. The problem is they don't really have like a criteria of what's a good one. Just like they don't have a criteria of who are the great artists. You walk through an art fair these days and you look in all these booths, you see all these young artists, and how do you know what's good? Well, what's good is what you resonate with, what means something to you personally. We have no idea what's good. It takes like 50 years to know what's good. So hopefully in 50 years, the Museum of Modern Art and other great museums will have collections that will be not just sort of historic NFTs, but actually vibrating, meaningful NFTs that make us as humans, understand something about our existence, something about who we are and where we've been and where we're going.
Well, you say something that I love, which was, a lot of people over history have misinterpreted Calder's intent with some of his pieces, right? And what I loved about what Audrey and Aaron did with TR Labs was, it was let us sort of pull you back, educate you, and bring you into what the artist's intent was. Do you mind sort of talking a little bit about that battle between, you know, here you're sort of pushing forward the legacy of one of the greatest artists, historically, and at the same time, there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding around this artist, and you have to also figure out how do you introduce this artist to a whole new sort of genre of collectors. Like I see in the audience Matthew Cherry, who goes by Matthew the First. And what was funny was the first time we had this conversation with Audrey, I pulled him up on stage and he had no clue who Calder was. And then he went through the entire test. And now I believe he passed very well, very high. But I found that really interesting. Like having to battle historical legacy of misinterpretation of intent. B, introduce the artist to a whole new sort of group of collectors in a manner that you were able to sort of reform. And so, do you mind taking us through that and how you saw that from the foundation's perspective?
Well, the audience is Matthew, for sure. Certainly, the audience is not people who say NFTs aren't art. They have access to Calder uh, all day, every day, in many places in the world. I mean, the Calder Foundation does a dozen projects around the world every year. We have 2.5 million visitors that see our exhibitions and projects every single year. So it's like running quite a large museum, using the assets of the bricks and mortar from the institutions all over the place, all over the globe. We love that. We love to bring the works to people, and we love to challenge the museums how to install them, how to engage them, how to use them, how to utilize them in a way that people feel connected to them. We're always trying to get people closer and connected. At the same time, we have to protect them and preserve them. So that's always the dichotomy there. But yeah, Matthew is the audience. If you've never heard of Calder before, that's great. That's exactly who we want to engage and challenge them to learn something, especially out of kind of the mainstream dialogue of Calder made pretty shapes that move in harmony and poetically and in the wind, because that's not who Calder was. That's not what he did. That's a small aspect of what he was about and what he did. And to get into the bigger aspect of what he was about takes a lot more work. When Audrey and Sin, her founding partner, decided to try and get Calder to, they had access to me because I knew Sin and I had met Audrey some years ago. And so we had a chat. It was actually last December. It's like not even that long ago. We had a chat about what could TRLab do? And I kept saying, we're not interested in things that are financial. We'd already shot down probably 12 proposals to do projects that would mint us a bunch of cash. And that wasn't interesting. Like that didn't get us anywhere. That was just minting cash. And there's nothing wrong with making some money, but it's purposeless if you're not creating any kind of intent in community. So not to pick on Matthew the First, but he's the audience. He's the person who we want to engage, that they don't know Calder, but they're interested and they want to know something more about, how humanity creates a future for ourselves. Calder was always making a future. Calder made works in the 1920s, the 1930s, 1940s, and he was always understanding those works would exist today in present time. And they would be active and they would be energetic and creating kind of experience. Obviously, he didn't know anything about Web 1, 2, or 3, but I like to think because he was really a disruptor. He disrupted so many times, inventing different sculptural mediums and ways to experience art. I think he would have been very intrigued by this moment. I don't know if I even answered your question, Keith.
No, I mean, you totally did. But there's one part that I also just want you to address, which is, and I found it fascinating talking to your team as well, which is the constant struggle that you have against misinterpretation of Calder's intent with some of his pieces, right? Sometimes people will sit there and wax poetic as to the meaning. And I loved that you would look at this and you would say sometimes there is no meaning, right? And I think that that was one of my favorite aspects of Calder's approach. And do you mind sort of talking about this notion of creating without the intent of having to have meaning all the time?
Well, Calder's art is really challenging because it looks like it has a meaning and an intention from the artist of meaning that he's trying to tell us something. In fact, he's not. And he said very specifically, there is no meaning. He didn't say it's meaningless. He said it doesn't have meaning. And thus, if it doesn't have meaning, let's just take his whole body of work. Let's just say there's no meaning. That means you have to bring yourself to the work. You have to have an open heart. You have to be super curious, quizzical person who wants to engage and see what can happen when you engage his work. So it takes a person that has to kind of know themselves a little bit or a lot to get into his work, because it's not there to be explained to you. So one of the problems we do have is when curators and museums say, this is what it means, this is how you have to experience it. There's no other way to experience it. There's no other interpretation. There's no other experience. And yeah, that's definitely a problem. And it's been a problem for many, many decades. This isn't a recent problem. It's not a, it's not a year 2000 problem. It's something that happened in the 1960s in his life, and he decided to stop even speaking about his work because he'd rather not what he said be how you interpret it or experience it, but what you say, what you experience. So it's not that I have a bone to pick with people and their interpretation. It's fine for them to have an interpretation. It's when they want to tell other people how to interpret it that's the issue. When they want to say, this is the definition, this is the meaning, this is the experience. That's the issue.
By the way, you gave me such great ammo for my conversation with my wife when I got home. So it was amazing. I was
What do
like,
you mean?
I said, that was your interpretation, but it's not the interpretation, right? And
Uh-oh.
it was
So I
it
got
was
you in trouble.
amazing. It was amazing. Wait. So now I like you've gone through this. I do appreciate like you could have taken the approach of minting a ton of pieces, going after a cash grab, everything. Instead, you really focused on education and bringing people into understanding sort of the history and the legacy. What was what was your biggest surprise from this whole entire sort of process so far, or this evolution or strategy? What was your biggest surprise?
I think getting me to even think about a new form of engagement, even like a new audience, um, that was really surprising. I've spent the last 35 years working on Calder every day and making exhibitions and thinking about how to engage those people physically in space. And so I never really thought, I always thought that like the internet was a challenge for engaging and understanding Calder. And then Audrey was amazing in sort of getting me to see that there are new possibilities. I think that's like the greatest experience that I had, the greatest thing that I learned. Also, having 1,200 people do the quiz was many more than I thought.
I will say that blew my mind, and the average score was essentially 76%, which was equally as impressive. Audrey, I want to throw it over to you. You've been very quiet. What was your biggest surprise?
I think my biggest surprise has been two surprises. One, the amount of people who did the quiz and wrote great essays about as part of their process of doing the quiz. I was really surprised by the quality of the essays that came through. And then I think the second thing that's been really shocking to me is Keith, I don't remember if you back in August when we ran into each other and I had said, you know, a lot of what we're thinking about in terms of the educational experience is that you don't need to pay anything to collect the artwork, but for people who go through the educational experience and then collect, my bet was that they feel a lot more deeper appreciation for the works because they have spent time learning and studying it instead of just thinking it's aesthetically cool or matches their taste. And I think what's been really shocking to me, it's not a single collector who has purchased the artwork thus far has have listed the artwork on the secondary market, which is really fascinating behavior, especially in the NFT market where usually, you know, people are listing things on the secondary market right after they purchase.
Well, so I like to jump in. I love, and I was so excited to see how this thesis played out because it's sort of like the equivalent of, and pardon the crassness of this analogy, but like pledging a fraternity or sorority, where it's like if you make it difficult to get in, it's harder to leave, right? And you know, a lot of artists who enter into the space like come into the space and have a brand name. Calder's a brand name, Vassarelli's a brand name. Like there's a lot of amazing artists that have entered into the space with brand names. And I felt that people without this educational sort of stratifier in the beginning would collect what they felt were brand names and flip them as fast as they could with no respect to the artist. This approach caught me off guard. And just so everyone knows, like this is how this relationship came about, which was Audrey presented it at Christie's, and I just ran up to her on stage and I said, I love Calder. I want to help you promote it as a personal fan of Calder. When I was like in fourth, fifth grade, I was making Calder sculptures in art class. Like Sandy made a joke, but this is how we both realized that we grew up in New York City. Every weekend I was at the Whitney, you know, staring at the circus that Calder did. And so this was a really important evolution to see as an artist and as a brand and as a legacy enter into the Web3 space. I just am floored at how positive the response has been, the number of people that did the essays, the education, the learning, the deference and the respect and the approach. I mean, I just, you know, I couldn't speak more highly of it. Kudos, Audrey, and kudos to Sandy, to you and the foundation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. And as you heard during your visit, I think a lot of this came together. It was really such a collaboration and deep partnership with the foundation where I think now Sandy has said this and I really agree, like looking back, it makes a lot of sense that, you know, given that the goal has been learning about Calder and getting people like Matthew, who has never heard about Calder before, to learn more about Calder, and people have,
We have to, can I pause for a second? We have to stop talking about Matthew. His ego is so through the roof. We have to just stop. Like, we should talk, like, if I was to choose, we should talk about Jihan Chu, okay, who refuses to come up on stage, but I know we all know, right? And so, like, let's talk about Jihan. Anyone but Matthew, Audrey, okay? No more
okay,
Matthew talks.
anyone but Matthew, ABM. But for other people who have, you know, learned about, like, even for me, I thought that I was a Calder fan, but there is so much that I took away from the experience that enabled me to understand Calder on a deeper level. And it's actually been a really amazing journey to TRLab team. And I need to thank the foundation too, because I think the foundation, in talking to us, they were so willing to try out new things as long as it kept to their goal of education, and they fully and firmly believed in that all the way through. And I don't think that we would have been able to, you know, come up with this sort of quiz experience and this sort of engagement had the foundation not been pushing and collaborating with us to give us the content that we would need to bring this experience together.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I hope every major historical artist that enters into Web3 takes this approach. And I hope that as the space continues to evolve, people begin to assume this approach too, because one of the best things in Web3 is getting to know the artists, right? Getting to know the creators. But to understand their stories is just, it's incredibly powerful. Thank you, by the way, for setting this up today. Sandy, since you're rarely on Twitter, and this is a unbelievably rare moment, like I'd love to give you the last words for everyone and turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for talking this morning. This was fun. I do want to say that my compatriots, all those other artists, estates, foundations, all of those no longer alive, but spectacularly important and wonderful artists who are so inspirational to all of us, frankly. I hope they don't do what we did. I hope that they took what we did and they do something much more brilliant. And I hope they push how humans experience Web3 much further than we did. I mean, we tried a few things. I think it was successful by most metrics, and it was fun, but it was risky. It felt risky. And now I think it's a lot less risky for my compatriots to push forward. So thank you both.
And Audrey, with that, do you want to finish up and close out the room? Final words?
Yes, I want to last say a few things. If you go to calderquestion.trlab.com, it's not too late to join in the assembly process with the free educational NFTs that are called non-space NFTs that people were able to mint after successfully completing and passing the quiz. There's actually been a lot of interest in our community for people talking about how they have highlighted elements of Calder's works that they haven't seen. And last but not least, I also do want to give thanks to Raoul Marx, who is the amazing artist, two-time Emmy Award winner, did the film titles for Westworld, The Crown, and he really came together with us to put forward, I think, as Sandy said, a really amazing interpretation of bringing Calder into Web3 that I think really aligned with how we thought about the educational part of the process. So Raul unfortunately could not be here this morning, but I just want to give thanks to him here.
Go Raul!
Yes.
And on that note, thank you all so much for joining today. Um, uh, you know, um, I hope you've enjoyed this experience. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. But as Sandy would say, and I do agree, hopefully this lays the foundation for just incredible evolutions from here, and just people to continue to build and build and build. And so, to TR Labs and to the Calder Foundation, congratulations. I know I feel firmly proud as a collector to say that this was amazing. And as a part of the Timepiece community, thank you for, providing support to our community members. We just love that partnership and the invitations that you extended out. And to anyone who has the chance to qualify to get to the Calder Foundation, I will tell you, I hate everything. Okay, there's very rarely an experience that leaves me speechless. It is a spectacular experience. It is one of the most wonderful experiences. I hope someone in the crowd, wins this and achieves it. You should experience it yourself. And so, Audrey, with that, you can close the room if you want.
Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you so much, Sandy. Happy Monday, everyone.